Hi, in this screencast, I'm going to talk more about this e-argument or the event data object. If you recall from the previous event screencast, the event object gave you specific detail about that particular event that it's associated with. So for a quick review, let me go ahead and run this. Open up the browser, we refresh, and I click on the button. And notice we have two different events. Remember, we had the custom event, which really doesn't have much at all associated with it. So that event data object is fairly empty. And then we have the mouse event. And I click on this. You have all these properties. We have the screen X, screen Y. We have all this event flow stuff, which we're not getting into, the bubbles phase. We have the client X, the client Y. Anyway, a whole bunch of stuff related to a mouse event. And these are all properties, all this stuff right here. These are all properties of that event data object, or DTO. In this case, that event is a mouse event. Wouldn't it be really cool, though, if I could add my own custom property to this event data object? I'm going to show you how to go ahead and do that. Let's do something a little bit different here. Let's do something kind of fun or kind of cool. Now, wouldn't it be neat if you pushed something to an array that not only did the contents get added to the end of the array, that you would also be notified of that particular event? In other words, I would love for the array object to dispatch an event when you push contents to the end of the array. But in order to achieve that, we're going to have to modify the array's prototype. We're going to have to add a method that not only will push contents to the end of the array, but it will also dispatch an event to let you know that there was a change to that actual array. Here's the code that I wrote to modify the array's prototype. I decided to add a method called superPush to the array object. Now what I want this to do is to behave just like the regular push method, but to also allow for event dispatching, so I can get notified anytime you push something to the end of the array. If you recall, the regular push method takes on multiple arguments. That is why I'm using the rest parameter here to allow for an unlimited number of arguments, because you don't know if you're going to push one thing or two things or three things or 30 things. So how are you going to know how many arguments you're going to have for this function? You really don't. But it needs to allow for any number of arguments. So that is what the rest parameter does. Think of this arg variable as an array. So the first thing that needs to happen, I want the superPush method to behave like the regular push. We'll do that first, and then after that we'll dispatch the event to notify that the array has been modified. Since we know arg is an array, we're going to loop through each of those elements and push them one at a time to the array. So that's what's happening here. We're looping through each argument in this rest parameter and push them one at a time to the array. Now that's step one. Step two is to now we need to go ahead and dispatch an event that there was a change in this array or something was pushed to the end of the array. So I create an event, new event. I call the event array changed. And now check out what's happening here. I am adding my own properties to this event data, to this DTO. I'm adding the array itself, and you'll see why a little bit later. I'm also adding a property called added to let you know what elements were actually added to the array, just in case you wanted that information. And of course, lastly, we dispatch the event. Let's go check out the rest of the code and then give this thing a test. What I want to happen is when you click on the Add Grade button in your browser, I wanted to add the 100 to this array called grades. And not only add the 100 to the array like any other kind of push method, I wanted to dispatch an event and be notified that the array has changed. So we have our self-executing function. Here's our grades array set up on line 6. We have a basic query selector to select a button in the DOM. And once you click on the button, it runs the onClick callback method. So let's go down to the onClick method. Now I want to push the 100 into the grades array. We're not going to use the built-in method push because that does not do any event dispatching. We're going to use our superPush method, and we're going to superPush 100. So hopefully it'll behave like the regular push, but in addition to that, it's going to dispatch an event. And the name of that event is called array changed. And again, this is where it gets dispatched. I'm looking at that prototype method, superPush again, and we're listening for it here. So anytime that event occurs, the onChanged method is going to execute. So let's check out the onChanged method. This is the callback method, our event handler. Here's our event data. We stored in a variable called e, that's that argument. And we're logging, hey, you added e.added to the array. But what is e.added? So let's go back to our other script, and that information is right here. The property EVT.added are those elements that got added to the end of the array. And here's the variable right here. I'm going to go ahead and run this now and see if it outputs to the console what we're expecting. Here's the code right here, and it should console log, hey, you added e.added, which is this number right here, or whatever you put here, and then to the array, finish the string, and it also should load the array itself in its entirety. So it should console log 70, 80, 90, this array, plus the added stuff to the array, in this case, which was 100. So again, it should log two things. Hey, you added 100, e.added, to the array, and underneath that, it should also console log the entire array, which is 70, 80, 90, and 100, a total of 4 elements. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the browser and check that out. I'm going to hit refresh. Notice there's nothing there now. I haven't clicked on anything. As soon as I click add grade, those 2 console logs should appear. And here they are. Hey, you added 100 to the array. 70, 80, 90, 100. That's the actual array in its entirety, all 4 elements added. So far things are looking pretty good. It looks like it's working. I'm going to go ahead and play around with that script a little more. Let's go back to the main script here. And instead of pushing 100, just to show that it works with multiple elements being pushed to the array, I'm going to say 100, 10, Bob, and see if it still works. So go back to the browser. Go ahead and let's clear that out, refresh everything. I'm going to hit add grade. Hey, you added 110 Bob to the array. So the event got dispatched correctly because you see it, otherwise you wouldn't see that console there. And of course there's the rest of it, 70, 80, 90, 110 Bob. So another thing, let me do multiple pushes, multiple lines of code, and see if the event gets redispatched. See if you can listen to the event more than once. So grades, I'll super push again. And this time I'm going to add, it doesn't matter, -2, 10, Scott. Now we have 2 super push methods occurring. So if that's the case, then this method on change should get called twice. That event is getting dispatched twice, so the event handler associated with that event should also fire twice. Let's go ahead and run it. Refresh everything, hit add grade. And here's the result from the first push, these 2 console logs here. Hey, you did 110 and Bob, and there's the result, 70, 80, 90, 110 and Bob. And then you did the second push, the super push method, and you pushed -2, 10 Scott that time, and that got added to the array. And here's the entire array after both super push methods have been invoked, 70, 80, 90, 110 Bob, -2, 10 and Scott. So everything seems to be working perfectly with this. One last thing I want to explain to you is why do we do this? Why do we include an array property to that event data object? Why do we do this on line 8 here? Well, one reason is this. I'm going to go ahead and take this function, this callback function, out of the self-executing function. Now notice what we did here. This is kind of big. On line 6 is where we define the grades array. Before, that line of code was in the same scope as this. But now we're in a different scope. So if I were inside the onChange callback, or the event handler, I would not have access to this grades variable. It's in a different scope. If you recall, in JavaScript, variables are defined in the function that they're in, and you can only access those variables from within that function, or the inner function of that, so the inner function can see outer functions variables. So not this way. The function onChange cannot see the variable grades. But it doesn't matter. We've attached that actual array to the event data object. So as long as you have access to the event data object, you can access any of those properties. I'm going to go ahead and test it and see if it works. It should do the same thing as it did before. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and remove this because our console is getting a little cluttered. And to show you the HTML that don't have any magic code running or scripts that you're not aware of, here's our 2 simple JavaScript files. We have the array joy and the event basic.js. The array joy is the script that modifies the array's prototype, and this is the rest of the code here that you've seen. So let's go ahead and go to the browser and run this. Let me refresh, and it still works. And that's pretty cool because now the scope of this variable grades doesn't matter at all because that array is attached to the DTO or the event data object.